What if the woman you were meant to protect was the one who refused to let anyone protect her again? Wyoming Territory, late August, 1882. The mountains rose dark and blue against the evening sky when James Carter pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge. Smoke curled in a thin trail from the small cabin below, drifting through the quiet trees. The place had belonged to his older brother, Daniel, before the accident in the North Ravine. Before the avalanche took his life in a breath and left silence where his laugh used to be. James hadn't been back here since the burial. But tonight, something in his chest had pulled him off the trail and brought him straight to the cabin door he used to knock on every Sunday. A shape moved near the fence line. A woman gathering fallen branches, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her steps were slow, tired in a way that came from long days and too many thoughts. When she turned slightly, the last edge of sunlight caught her face. It was Helen, Daniel's widow. She bent down to pick up another branch, and the basket on her arm slipped, spilling half its contents. She froze, shoulders tight, then crouched to gather them again. James climbed down from the saddle, boots crunching the dry grass. "Helen!" he called softly. She stiffened, then stood and faced him. Her eyes were sharp, the same rich brown he remembered, but now lined with a kind of quiet grief she carried alone. "James," she said, "what brings you here?" "I saw the smoke," he answered. "Thought maybe you needed help." Her jaw tightened just a little. "I don't." He stepped closer, hands open. "You shouldn't be out here alone, not this late, not with winter settling early." "I manage fine." He didn't argue. He just looked at her basket, too heavy for one person to carry all day, and the fence sagging behind her, and the way she held herself like she was bracing for something she refused to name. "Helen," James said gently, "how long since you've had someone ride out to check on you?" She brushed a loose strand of hair back. "I stopped expecting anyone." Quote. He nodded slowly. Daniel wouldn't have wanted that. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't look away. "Daniel is gone." "I know," James said, voice low, "but you're not. And you shouldn't be left out here like this." The words seemed to hit the air between them, quiet and careful. She didn't speak at first. She just watched him, as if trying to measure the truth of his voice. He picked up the fallen branches and placed them back in her basket. She didn't thank him, but she didn't stop him either. "Is the chimney smoking right?" he asked. "Looked thin from the ridge." "It clogs sometimes," she said. "I clean it when I can." "I'll take a look." "You don't need to," she said quickly. "I know," he replied, "but I'm going to." He walked toward the cabin before she could argue. She followed, silence stretching between them like a thread. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old ashes. The table was neatly set, though only one plate rested there now. A blanket was draped over a chair, worn at the edges from overuse. He glanced at the hearth. Soot darkened the stone. "You've been doing all this alone?" he asked quietly. "I prefer it that way." James didn't smile. No one truly prefers to struggle. She set the basket down and straightened her shoulders. "I am not weak." "I never said you were." "You think I need someone to save me?" He turned to her, meeting her eyes. "I think you've been carrying too much, and I think Daniel would want me to look out for you." Her breath caught, sharp as a flinch. "I do not belong to anyone," she said, voice low but steady. "Not anymore." James held her gaze. "I'm not here to own you, Helen. I'm here because you matter, and because you shouldn't have to face this land alone." For a moment her eyes softened. Then she stepped past him, pushing open the window to let the smoke drift out. Evening light spilled over her face, warming the sadness tucked at the corners of her mouth. "How long will you stay?" she asked after a moment. "As long as you need help." "I didn't ask for any." He nodded. "Sometimes people don't." She didn't answer. The silence in the room thickened, but not in a cold way. More like waiting, more like something neither of them was ready to name. James stepped outside and split the firewood with clean, sharp strikes. Helen watched from the doorway, arms folded, the wind lifting the ends of her hair. When he carried the stacked wood inside, she moved aside but held her chin high. "I don't want charity," she said. "It's not charity," he replied. "It's respect." Her eyes dropped for the first time. When the fire caught and the room warmed, Helen sank slowly into the chair beside the hearth. She looked tired in a way she hadn't allowed herself to show. "You can stay for supper," she said quietly. "Just supper." He nodded. "All right." They ate in near silence, but it wasn't uneasy. It was something slower, tentative, like two people stepping onto new ground. When he rose to leave, she stood too. "James," she said suddenly. He paused. "I don't want to be someone's duty," she said. "Not yours, not anyone's." He took his hat in his hands. "You aren't a duty, you're a choice." Quote. Her breath shook just once, barely visible, but he saw it. "Good night, Helen," he said softly. She watched him go, standing in the doorway long after his horse disappeared into the trees. When she finally closed the door, she pressed her hand against her chest, as though steadying something that had begun to wake after too long. The next morning came cold and bright, the kind of morning that made the air sting sharp in the lungs. Helen stepped outside with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Frost clung to the grass, and the fence rails shimmered white in the early light. She paused when she saw the split logs stacked neatly by the door, twice as many as last night. James had returned before sunrise. She looked down the trail, but he was nowhere in sight. Only the quiet wind answered. She went back inside, but her chest felt unsettled, warm in places she didn't understand. Just before noon, hoofbeats broke the quiet. Helen stepped out as James rode into the clearing, reins loose, his hat tipped against the sun. He dismounted and tied his horse to the post. "I checked the north fence," he said. "Something pulled it down last storm. I patched it." "You didn't have to do that." Her voice was steady, but her hands twisted the edge of her shawl. He shrugged lightly. "I know, but it needed doing." She watched him, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Why are you really here?" His answer came slow but sure. "Because you shouldn't be left alone with a winter coming that would break most men." Helen's chin lifted. "I survived last winter." "You survived it with Daniel," he said gently, "and Daniel isn't here anymore." She froze. Just a breath, just a blink. But James saw the way her shoulders wavered. He stepped closer, but not enough to crowd. "You're strong," he said. "Stronger than you know. But strength doesn't mean you have to be alone. Alone is safer." "For who?" She didn't answer. She turned away and walked toward the woodpile. He followed slowly. "You don't trust me," he said. Helen picked up a log, stacked it hard. "Trust is how I lost everything. Daniel went up that ridge because he trusted folks who told him the path was safe." "Helen!" She shook her head sharply. "I'm tired of depending on people who leave. I'm tired of being something men feel responsible for." "I don't see you as something I own," James said quietly. "Or something I have to control. I'm just trying to help." Her voice cracked like dry wood. "Help always comes with a price." His jaw tightened at that. "Not mine," he said. "Never mine." Silence settled between them, thick as snow clouds. Helen pressed the back of her hand to her eyes, just for a heartbeat, then drew a long breath and steadied herself. "I don't want to need anyone," she whispered. James softened. "Then don't need me. Just let me be here." Her breath trembled. She set the log down and turned away. That afternoon, while he hammered new boards onto the stable wall, Helen stood at the cabin window watching him. She wasn't sure when it happened, but something inside her had begun to shift. Something slow, small, frightening. He worked with calm hands and steady breath. Not rushing, not pushing, just present. Her chest tightened. When evening came, he brought in fresh game, cleaned and wrapped. She wiped her hands on her apron. "You hunted for me?" "Hunted for supper," he corrected softly. "If you want it." She swallowed. "Stay then. Eat." He nodded once. "If you're sure." They cooked together, moving slow around each other, bumping shoulders once, neither pulling away. As they ate, the lantern light spilled gold across her hair, and James found his eyes drifting to her more often than he meant to. Afterward, as she washed the plates, he stepped beside her and handed her the next dish. They worked without speaking, hands brushing now and then, warmth building in the quiet. When the last plate was set aside, Helen leaned against the counter. "James." He lifted his head. "You can't stay here every night." "I know. But you came back." "I'll keep coming back as long as you'll open the door." She looked at him for a long time, her breath uneven. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered. "Nothing you don't choose to give." Quote. She closed her eyes carefully, like she was trying not to break. "Daniel loved you," James said softly. "He'd want you safe. He'd want you living again, not just surviving." She turned away sharply. "Don't talk about him like he's yours to speak for." James stepped back, nodding once. "All right." Regret flickered across her face, but she didn't apologize. He moved toward the door. "I'll check the roof before I leave. Storm's coming." "James," she said, her voice catching him mid-step. He turned. "I didn't mean," she swallowed. "I'm still learning how to stand on my own again." "I know," he said, "and I'm not trying to take that from you." She looked at him with something almost like fear, almost like hope. "If I let you stay, if I let you close, I need to know you won't try to take my life and shape it into something that fits you." James stepped close enough that she could feel the warmth from him but not the pressure of his touch. "Helen," he said, voice low and steady, "I don't want to shape you into anything. I just want to stand beside you." Her breath broke, just a little. He turned to go, but she reached out and touched his sleeve. "Stay by the fire tonight," she whispered, "just until the storm passes." He nodded, eyes soft. "All right." They sat on opposite sides of the hearth at first, watching the flames dance. Slowly, carefully, Helen's eyes drifted toward him. And for the first time since Daniel's death, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, she didn't want to be. The storm rolled in heavy during the night, the kind of hard, pushing wind that made the shutters creak and the chimney moan. James slept lightly in the chair across from the fire, boots still on, one hand resting near the rifle at his side. Helen lay on the cot, blanket pulled to her chin, but she wasn't sleeping. Her eyes stayed on him more than on the fire. Before dawn, the storm eased, leaving a thin layer of white over the clearing. When Helen stepped outside to fetch water, James followed a few minutes later, drawing on his coat. "You didn't have to stay awake all night," she said softly. He shrugged. "Didn't feel right falling asleep while the wind shook the whole cabin." She looked at him, at the tired lines in his face, at the way he stood like he'd been guarding something important. Heat gathered behind her ribs, warm and dangerous. Inside, she poured water into the kettle. James took off his coat and hung it near the hearth. The room settled into a quiet that felt different from the day before. Not tense, not hiding anything, just waiting. "James," she said suddenly, "why my cabin? Why me?" He didn't look away. "Because you're Daniel's widow, and because you're alone, and because," he paused, "because I care about whether you make it through the winter." She folded her arms. "People care with conditions. They care as long as they get something back." "I don't want anything back from you," he said gently. "Not your promise, not your obedience, not your grief." Her breath softened. "Then what do you want?" He stepped closer, but slow enough she could stop him if she chose. "I want you to know you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." Her throat tightened. She stared at him, trying to read the parts of him he wasn't saying. "You're not trying to replace Daniel?" "No," he said. "No one could." She closed her eyes, letting that settle inside her chest. After breakfast, they stepped outside to check the fence lines. Snow crackled under their boots. Helen walked ahead, her hands tucked in her coat pockets. James followed but stayed close enough to reach her if she slipped. When they reached the north fence, she touched the fresh boards he'd nailed the day before. "You fixed this straight," she murmured. "Daniel used to fix things sideways." James chuckled softly. He always hammered like the nails offended him. A tiny smile lifted her lips. He did. The smile faded slowly, replaced by something gentler. "You miss him too," she said. "Every day," he replied. Helen looked away toward the trees. "I'm still afraid of letting someone close again. Afraid I'll lose everything twice." James leaned on the fence rail. "Losing Daniel wasn't your fault. Loving him doesn't mean you're chained to grief forever. But if I care about someone again, I could lose them too." "You could," he said honestly. "But caring can build something you carry even when loss comes, not something that destroys you." She didn't speak. She just breathed, long and slow, like her chest had forgotten how to do it without pain. They walked back to the cabin at dusk. Snowflakes drifted, soft as dust. Helen stopped near the woodpile, turning to face him. "James?" "Hmm?" She swallowed. "What happens if I let you stay? What happens if I stop pushing you away?" He stepped closer, but not touching her. "Then we take it one step at a time. I don't want to own you. I don't want to control you. I just want to build something steady, if you'll build it with me." Helen stared at him, tired and hopeful at once. "I'm not used to being asked. I'm used to being told." "I'm asking," he said softly. Her breath hitched. She looked at the cabin, at the small smoke line from the chimney, at the place where she had spent the hardest months of her life. Then she looked at him again. "James, if I choose you, I want it to be because I'm free, not because I'm alone." He nodded. "Then choose when you're ready." She stepped closer, close enough that their breath touched in the cold air. "What if I'm ready now?" James didn't move. "Then I'm here." Her hand reached for his coat, gripping the wool at his chest. "I don't want to be owned again," she whispered. "You won't be," he answered. "Not by me." She leaned her forehead lightly against his chest. James let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, gentle and steady, like he was holding something he wanted to earn, not claim. Helen didn't pull away. That night, she let him stay by the fire again, but this time she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Maybe I don't want the cabin to stay empty." He turned to her. "It doesn't have to." She lifted her face, meeting his eyes. "If we build something, it has to be together, equal." He nodded once. "Together." Quote. Her lips trembled in a way that wasn't fear anymore. She shifted closer, letting her hand find his. Their fingers intertwined, slow and sure, no claim, no pressure, just choice. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Helen's world felt like it was opening instead of breaking. Weeks later, James came with his bedroll and tools. Helen cleared space on the shelf for another cup. They repaired the roof together, side by side. They planted winter vegetables in the soil behind the cabin. They woke each morning to the smell of coffee and the quiet comfort of someone breathing in the same room. They had no vows written yet, no talk of marriage. But the cabin no longer held only loss. It held two lives rebuilding from the raw earth, slow and steady, with room enough for both. Helen chose him freely. James stayed willingly. And together, they built a home where no one owned anyone, but both belonged.